Mom demanded I do something about my pregnancy because my sister's wedding had to be the center of attention. Then she went even further. So, my younger sister is set to get married at the end of this year, and I just gave birth to my son about 3 weeks ago. While most of my family was thrilled about the baby, my mother was the exception, not that I was surprised. To her, nothing and no one is more important than her precious youngest daughter. I found out I was pregnant months ago, and my sister got engaged to her long-term boyfriend when I was about 6 months along. Anyone with basic math skills could see that by the time my sister's wedding rolled around, my baby would have already been born. Now, if she had planned a small, intimate ceremony that could be put together quickly, it might have been different. But no, she wanted a grand, extravagant wedding, something that naturally required a lot of time to organize. Despite all this, my mom insisted that I do something about my pregnancy so that it wouldn't take away from my sister's moment. My sister and I have never been close. She's spoiled, and ever since our dad passed away a few years ago, we've barely spoken. The only reason I even maintained any contact with my mother was because I had promised my father before he died that I'd look after her, knowing full well that my sister wouldn't step up. She simply isn't responsible enough. Even though my mom has always played favorites and my sister was the clear winner, I still tried to keep a relationship with her, until recently, when she showed up at my house with some news. At first, I assumed she just wanted to share my sister's engagement with me, but then she hit me with an absurd demand. She claimed that since I was having a baby the same year my sister was getting married, it would steal her spotlight. Apparently, a pregnancy was a bigger life event than a wedding in her eyes, and she couldn't allow anything to overshadow my sister's big moment. I had no idea what she was even talking about. It's not like my pregnancy would stop people from attending the wedding. In fact, I wasn't even invited, just like she hadn't been invited to mine, because we're not friends. There was no way I could steal attention from a wedding I wouldn't even be at. And besides, I'm not a public figure. It's not like the entire event would be filled with people whispering about me and my baby. I thought I had made some solid points, but my mother wouldn't back down. She demanded that I keep my pregnancy and my child a secret from our extended family and mutual friends. Her reasoning? She didn't want my sister's limelight to be dimmed in any way. I was stunned. It was ridiculous, and I refused. We had a massive argument, and after that, I cut contact with her. I felt guilty about breaking my promise to my father, but at that point, I had no other choice. She was being completely irrational, and I was already dealing with pregnancy hormones. I didn't need the extra stress. Since then, she hasn't been involved in my life at all. My husband and his family have been my support system, helping me care for our baby from day one. My mother wasn't even present when I gave birth. My husband called her that day, but she declined to come because she was out with my sister. Honestly, even if she had been free, I doubt she would have shown up. She's made it clear where her priorities lie, and I'm definitely not one of them. If my own mother could completely turn her back on me just because she thought I was stealing attention from my sister by having a baby, then I had nothing left to say to her. That was the final straw. So, after everything that happened, I cut all contact with her, and honestly, I was perfectly fine with that. But then, out of nowhere, she called me a couple of days ago. At first, I ignored it. But when she started bombarding me with frantic texts, practically begging me to answer, I knew something was wrong. She kept insisting that she had urgent news to share. I didn't want to deal with her, but I couldn't shake the thought of the promise I had made to my father. So, against my better judgment, I finally picked up. And thank God I did, because that's how I found out that my mother is in serious legal trouble. Turns out, she tried to put my baby up for adoption without our consent, and the adoption agency uncovered her scheme. It was a clear case of fraud and misrepresentation. Apparently, she had reached out to an adoption agency and lied, claiming she had power of attorney. She told them that both my husband and I were addicts who had been declared unfit parents by the court. Because of that, she positioned herself as the legal guardian of my son and took it upon herself to give him up for adoption. But, of course, the agency wasn't stupid. They quickly realized that all the paperwork she provided was forged and immediately shut down the process. Not only that, but they also informed her that they were pursuing legal action against her. She was about to be served, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. That's why she was calling me. She was terrified. She thought if she told me first, I might somehow help her. She was sobbing on the phone, pleading with me to do something, but I could barely process the fact that she actually expected me to save her after what she had done. I understood that she wanted my sister to have all the attention, but to go as far as trying to give away my child? That was beyond disgusting. And honestly, it was a stupid move on her part, because now the situation would bring even more attention to me, especially since I fully intend to take legal action against her. After she finished explaining herself, I didn't even bother responding. I just hung up. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No sympathy, no regret, nothing. If anything, I believe she deserves whatever consequences are coming her way. And honestly, even worse. Later that same day, I got a call from the adoption agency. They wanted to inform me of everything that had happened and make sure I could take the necessary steps to address it. By that point, I had already spoken with my husband about my mother's phone call, so when the agency reached out, we both knew exactly what we needed to do. There was no way she could pull something like this and just walk away without consequences. The next day, we consulted a lawyer, and within a few days, we had officially filed a civil lawsuit against her. The legal proceedings are set to begin soon, but given the severity of the situation, criminal charges have also been brought against her. At this point, there's little to no room for negotiation. The best-case scenario for her would be an out-of-court settlement or possibly a plea deal for the criminal charges, but even then, there's a real chance she'll be facing jail time. For now, she's under house arrest, but she can still reach out to me, which she's been doing nonstop. My inbox has been flooded with email after email, all of them pleading for my help. At least she's finally admitting that she messed up. She keeps apologizing and saying she got carried away because she was upset that I refused to hide my pregnancy for my sister's sake. She knows what she did was completely out of line, and she swears she's truly sorry. I had been ignoring her messages without any issue, until yesterday, when she said something that completely threw me off. She reminded me of the promise I had made to my father, that no matter what, I would always take care of her. That hit me hard. I never even realized she knew about that conversation because it was something I had shared with my father in private. Now, for the first time, I feel torn about my decision to take legal action against her for trying to put my child up for adoption without my consent. After thinking it over, I've decided not to drop the civil lawsuit. She did this to herself, and I refuse to let guilt stop me from holding her accountable. For years, I honored the promise I made to my father. Ever since he passed, I tried my best to take care of my mother, even when it was clear that she didn't care about me. But at this point, she's just using emotional manipulation to try and get out of trouble, and I nearly fell for it. Bringing up my father to defend herself? That's low. People have criticized me for sticking to my promise for so long when it's obvious that my mother never prioritized me. And maybe they have a point. But if you've ever lost a parent, you'd understand how heavy that loss is. My dad died of cancer, and I made that promise to him on his deathbed. That's not something I could ever take lightly. But this is where I draw the line. Now that I've made up my mind, there's nothing that can change it. Even my husband agrees that I'm making the right decision. I'm not asking for an outrageous sum. I just want her to reimburse me for everything I've spent on her over the past few years. Since my sister refuses to contribute even a cent toward our mother's well-being, I've shouldered that responsibility alone. To be fair, my sister doesn't spend money on anyone but herself, so it's hardly surprising. That's probably why my father asked me to look after Mom. He knew my sister wouldn't step up, but I don't think he ever imagined something like this happening. And honestly, I believe he would forgive me for taking this course of action. But even if he wouldn't, I have to do this for my own sake. I've thought it through, and this lawsuit won't leave my mother destitute. My father left her the house and a significant sum of money, so she'll be fine. On top of that, she has her brother to lean on now. And even in the worst-case scenario, if she loses everything because of this, it's no longer my problem. I've done everything I could, and it's never been enough for her. I'm done trying to be the perfect daughter. My only priority now is being a good mother to my child. It's been a few weeks since my last update. Right now, we're in mediation as everyone is trying to settle the civil lawsuit out of court. But it's not going well. Every session ends early because my mother either gets too emotional or starts screaming. I don't know if it's a deliberate tactic or if she's genuinely breaking down, but either way, it's only dragging things out. What she doesn't seem to understand is that there's no escaping this. No matter how much she resists, the outcome isn't going to change. Meanwhile, my uncle has reached out to pressure me into backing down. He insists that the settlement amount I'm asking for is excessive and unfair. He even tried the guilt trip approach, reminding me that my mother raised me from infancy, so refusing to forgive her for one little mistake makes me ungrateful. But that's just it. This wasn't a little mistake. She forged legal documents to falsely claim she had power of attorney over my child. That level of deception isn't something that happens in the heat of the moment. It was planned. And that's what unsettles me the most. If the adoption agency hadn't been thorough in their vetting process, she might have actually gotten away with it. The more I reflect on it, the less inclined I am to show her any mercy. And frankly, I am being reasonable. I'm only asking for reimbursement for what I've already spent on her, not a single dollar more. Of course, none of that is detailed in the paperwork, so my uncle has no idea. Even when I explained it to him, he still insisted I was being unfair. After a while, I started getting really frustrated. I didn't want to argue with my uncle. We'd never had a bad relationship before, and I wasn't looking to ruin that. But since he seemed determined to push the issue, I finally snapped. I told him that if he was so concerned about his sister's well-being, maybe he should cover the settlement amount himself. That way, we could all move on a lot faster. That's when he lost it. He started yelling, calling me all sorts of names. At that point, it was clear there was no reasoning with him, so I just ended the call. Honestly, I don't understand how anyone can defend her right now, given what she's done. My uncle is one thing, but my sister has been even worse. Ever since she found out about the lawsuit, she's been insufferable. For some reason, she's convinced that this entire situation is about her, that I'm only doing this as some kind of revenge because she and my mother didn't give me enough attention. At least my uncle had the nerve to confront me directly. My sister, on the other hand, has been running her mouth to everyone behind my back. Thanks to her, the entire extended family now knows about the lawsuit, which is exactly what I was trying to avoid. This is a deeply personal and disturbing situation. I didn't want to have to explain it to anyone. But since she decided to turn it into a family-wide spectacle, people have been reaching out with endless questions. As much as I hate it, I've been answering them, partly because if this does go to court, I may need some of them to testify. So I'm just telling myself that it was bound to come out eventually, better now than later. The real issue, though, is the false narrative my sister is spreading. She's making it sound like I'm just being vindictive, like I'm taking legal action out of sheer spite. I don't even think she fully grasps the severity of what our mother did. This isn't some petty sibling drama that got out of hand. Our mother tried to steal my child. How can anyone be so dense and self-absorbed? Then again, it's my sister we're talking about. She's our mother's true daughter, through and through. Ironically, this entire mess started because my mother wanted my sister's wedding to be the biggest event of the year. That's why she pressured me to hide my pregnancy and my baby in the first place. And yet, thanks to her own actions, this scandal is now the defining family event, not just for this year, but probably for years to come. I hate to admit it, but from a pure gossip perspective, this is juicy. If I weren't personally involved, I'd probably find the whole thing ridiculously dramatic. It's almost poetic justice, because no matter how extravagant my sister's wedding turns out to be, nothing will overshadow this. Hey everyone, just wanted to share an update. My mother has officially agreed to our settlement terms, so we'll be receiving the money soon. However, she's still facing her criminal charges, and from what I hear, things aren't looking great for her. She and her lawyer are trying everything to keep her out of jail, but at this point, it's not looking promising. The prosecution has already reached out to me to testify, along with the adoption agency staff and a few other family members. So we'll see how that plays out. On a more positive note, things have been settling down for us. We even managed to take a short weekend trip with our son to visit his great-grandparents, my husband's grandparents, since mine are no longer around. Talking to them really put things into perspective. When I shared the guilt I'd been feeling about breaking my promise to my father, they reassured me that I had nothing to be ashamed of. If my father were still here, they believe he would have told me to stand my ground because what my mother did was beyond unacceptable. That conversation honestly lifted a huge weight off my chest, and the trip as a whole was exactly what I needed. I came back feeling refreshed and more at peace with my decision. As for my mother, it seems like she finally realized that throwing tantrums and storming out of our legal meetings wasn't doing her any favors. I assume her lawyer got through to her because, in our last few sessions, she actually sat through them, silent, barely making eye contact with me. When she did glance my way, it was so brief that it was clear she could hardly stand to look at me. And honestly, that's fine by me. She's lost the privilege of feeling entitled to my presence. Meanwhile, my uncle and sister are still going out of their way to badmouth me. But at this point, I don't care. The people who support me know the truth, and the people who just want to gossip will stay on the sidelines where they belong. As long as their words don't have any real consequences for me, they can say whatever they want. It's been a little over a month now, and we finally received our settlement money a couple of weeks ago. We're putting it aside for our son's future since, thankfully, we don't need it right now. It's satisfying to know that this was always money I was owed. It was just me taking back what I had spent on my mother over the years after my father passed. My sister knows this, but that didn't stop her from showing up unannounced the other day to throw yet another tantrum. According to her, I've ruined her wedding because our mother had promised to help pay for part of it. But now, since I dared to sue, our mother doesn't have any money left to contribute, and somehow, that's my fault. I swear, the entitlement is astonishing. The wildest part? While she was screaming at me, she literally admitted that I had only taken back my own money. So she was fully aware of the situation, yet still somehow convinced that I was the villain here. Instead of reflecting on why things had reached this point, she decided to show up at my doorstep and throw a tantrum. I didn't even let her inside. I stood at the door, listening to her rant, and the moment she raised her voice at me, I shut the door in her face. I had zero time for this nonsense. I was already juggling enough, working from home during maternity leave so I wouldn't be overwhelmed when I officially returned, all while taking care of my son. The last thing I needed was her unnecessary drama. But even after I shut the door, she refused to leave. She just stood outside, yelling about how unfair everything was for her. After a while, I got fed up and called the cops. Within minutes, they arrived, and as they dragged her away, she was screaming so loudly that even my neighbors, who had probably been watching from behind their curtains, stepped outside to see what was going on. It was beyond embarrassing. But more than that, it was disturbing. While she was cursing me out, she also made some pretty serious threats toward me and my child. I won't even repeat what she said, but it was enough to make me feel extremely unsafe. I had already called my husband when I called the cops, so he rushed home early. When I told him everything she had said, he was just as alarmed as I was. One of the officers even suggested we file a restraining order, and honestly, I think they were right. My sister knows where I live. She knows every way to reach me. And if she decides to make my life miserable, she could. I'm not saying she would follow through on her threats, but there are plenty of other ways to intimidate someone, and I refuse to live in fear, especially now that I'm a mother. So after a long talk with my husband, we decided that we're going to move. I had already been planning to change my phone number and other contact details so that only the people I trust can reach me. And honestly, it's not even just about my sister anymore. I've had way too many calls and messages from nosy people who just want to gossip about this whole situation. It's exhausting, and I'm done with it. The last thing I need is uninvited guests showing up just to pry into my life. It's time for a fresh start. Thankfully, my husband has been doing well for himself, and if necessary, we can always ask my in-laws for support. But no matter what, we are moving, and we are filing a restraining order against my sister. She's completely unhinged, and I refuse to let her come around and disrupt our lives any further. The past few months have been financially draining. Between legal fees, the cost of raising a newborn, and now planning a move, things have been tight. And with everything coming up, it's only going to get more expensive. But when I think about my son, his safety, his future, I know this is the right choice. Every bit of stress, every dollar spent, it's all worth it if it means we can live in peace. Honestly, I'm exhausted, completely drained. But my husband and my son keep me going. They're my motivation, my reason to push forward. I don't say it enough, but I feel incredibly lucky to have found a partner who truly understands me. And on top of that, his family has been nothing but supportive through all of this. Ever since my dad passed away, my in-laws have been there for me more than my own mother ever was. I know that's not something everyone gets to experience, and I don't take it for granted. I'm so grateful for them. This whole ordeal has been messy, exhausting, and honestly, never-ending. But I just keep telling myself that it has to end soon. And finally, last week, the verdict in my mother's trial came in. She's been convicted on all charges. Since she's a first-time offender, she managed to avoid jail time. but she's facing a massive fine as restitution, both to the adoption agency and to me. On top of that, she has to complete hundreds of hours of community service. Her lawyer played the mental health card, so instead of prison, she's been ordered to undergo court-mandated treatment at a rehabilitation facility. I haven't spoken to her since our civil lawsuit was settled, and honestly, I have no interest in reconnecting. I only found out about the verdict through other family members, and, well, I guess it's fair. Justice was served in some way, and that's all I can ask for at this point. I also managed to get a restraining order against my sister soon after my last update, so that's another big win for me. Right now, we're in the middle of moving, which has been stressful, but honestly, we can handle it. And with the money that's about to come in, it's been a huge relief. At this point, we might not even need to ask my in-laws for help, and best of all, we won't have to touch the settlement money we've set aside for our son's future. So overall, things have really worked out in our favor. As for my mother, she may have dodged jail time, but life isn't going so great for her. I've been hearing a lot of gossip and even received screenshots of my sister's latest social media posts. And wow, the hypocrisy is wild. She's now completely denouncing everything our mother did, claiming she had no idea any of this was happening and insisting she doesn't condone it. She even said she agrees with the conviction and thinks our mother deserves it. Which is funny, because before everything went down, she was firmly on our mother's side, backing her up 100%. From what I've heard, her sudden change of heart isn't exactly genuine. Her fiancé and his family weren't thrilled about him marrying into this mess, and they were even considering postponing the wedding. So, in a desperate attempt to save face, she publicly cut off our mother to make herself look better. It's actually kind of sad, for my mom, at least. She spent her entire life prioritizing my sister over everything and everyone else. And now, this is what she gets in return. Karma really did its thing. Do I feel bad for her? Nope, not even a little. Now that we're moving, I'm finally cutting ties with all of them for good. And honestly, I cannot wait.